In this presentation, we will be talking about the socio-psychological reasons someone may become a serial killer.
What makes a serial killer? A serial killer is someone who has murdered 3 or more people over a period of more than a month, with a cooling off period between murders. The motive is usually based on psychological, often sexual, gratification, though the motives may also include anger, thrill, money, and attention seeking. So there is more than one type of serial killing, so we included 5 different types of serial killing that can be differentiated. Serial killing is not limited to these 5, and their motives can be a combination of more than one of these. The visionary serial killer believes that they are another person and feel compelled to kill others. The visionary serial killer can often suffer from hallucinations, visions, and fictions. Mission-oriented killers can often believe their killings will help the world. These types of people view other people like homosexuals, prostitutes, different ethnicities or religions as undesirable. Hedonistic serial killers seek thrill in their lives and get a great amount of pleasure in killing others. Power-oriented killers seek to exert power over their victim. Many of these killers sexually abuse their victims to assert a point of dominance or power over them. Lastly, the profit-oriented are only focused on the profit-making and not any psychological aspects. The best example of this would be killing for money.
3 warning signs of a possible future serial killer, other known as the triad. First, the person partakes in the torture of animals and feels joy when doing so. Second, they have been a prolonged bedwetter. Third, also at a young age they have taken an interest in pyromania. An example of one of these traits in a serial killer was with Jeffrey Dahmer. Before Dahmer began killing and eating people, he started with practicing by harming cats and dogs. Here are some possible factors why someone may become a serial killer. There obviously can be more than this. First, some studies have said that child abuse that is physical, sexual, and mental can lead to someone becoming a serial killer. Any kind of trauma is the single recurring theme in the biographies of most killers. Next, the person could also be a psychopath, which could cause them to have no remorse about killing someone, but obviously not all psychopaths are serial killers. Next, some serial killers have no past family trauma or issues and still end up killing regardless. And lastly, many serial killers have been diagnosed with a personality disorder, which makes them emotionally unstable, manipulative, and self-centered, but obviously not all people with this disorder are serial killers.
What does the average serial killer look like? The average serial killer tends to be a white male from anywhere to 20 to 30 years old. They typically come from a lower or middle class background. Serial killers have the average IQ score of 94.7. A serial killer with an average IQ is more likely to shoot or strangle their victims, whereas a serial killer with a lower IQ score typically will use poison to kill their victims. And a serial killer with a higher IQ are more likely to use bombs to kill their victims. There are many different types of victims of serial killers. They tend to prey upon individuals that have been singled out by modern institutions. These include homeless people, prostitutes, migrant workers, homosexuals, children, the elderly, and hospital patients. Obviously, there's so many more victims of serial killers, but these are just a few.
The top 10 most deranged serial killers of all time, starting with Ted Bundy, who murdered at least 30 young women and girls, Andre Chikatilo, who murdered at least 42 women and children, Jeffrey Dahmer, who killed and dismembered 17 men and boys, Albert Fish, who admitted to molesting more than 400 children and murdered several of them, then John Wayne Gacy, who murdered at least 33 teenage boys and young men, Jack the Ripper, who murdered at least 5 female prostitutes, Joachim Kroll, who was convicted of 8 murders but confessed to 13, Pedro Lopez, who murdered at least 350 young girls, Gilles de Rez, who murdered between 80 and 200 children, And finally, Richard Ramirez, who murdered at least 14 people.
Victim luring and execution, organized. Depending whether a serial killer is an organized or disorganized type may influence the kind of victim they choose. Organized serial killers thoroughly plan their abduction, murder, and clean up or escape plan. Have a certain type of victim, example blonde woman, often stalks their victim before striking, socially competent, likely to be unexpected by their victims, intelligent and deceptively charming to lure victims, unexpected, likely to have a normal life, likely to have a vehicle and their own murder weapons, may take a trophy from the victim, not usually body parts, needs to return to crime scene to see what the police have done. Victim luring and execution, disorganized. Disorganized serial killers are less predictable and may act more out of fits of aggression, tend to attack when opportunity strikes, less likely to have a type, usually socially incompetent, likely to be unemployed or have a low-key job, usually don't have a vehicle, more likely to kill a victim close to their own home, they don't care to clean or cover up their murder scenes, they're more likely to mutilate a body and kill with whatever weapon or makeshift item is available, more likely to take body parts as a trophy, depersonalizes the victim to a thing or it.
A good example of a famous organized serial killer is Ted Bundy. He was viewed as an upstanding character by his peers and seemed like your average family man. He used his intelligence and charm to lure his preferred victim type, young college girls, to their death, often faking disabilities such as wearing a leg cast and using crutches in order to get the girls to help him to his car where he would then strike. He even sometimes impersonated authority figures to gain his victims' trust. And now an example of a disorganized killer is Jack the Ripper, a serial killer from the late 1800s who randomly and brutally killed his typeless victims. He also never attempted to cover up his murders, and often collected organs as a sort of trophy to himself. His random style of killing left him to never be caught.
Victim luring and execution, mixed. Mixed serial killers are not distinguishable as either organized or disorganized. They have the characteristics of both an organized and disorganized killer. Their attack can involve one or more offenders. During the attack, the offender may escalate into a different pattern during the course of an offense or of a series of offenses. In their crimes, there is some evidence of planning. Common characteristics of serial killers. Sensation-seeking, they lack remorse or guilt, impulsivity, the need for control, predatory behavior, they are very good at manipulating others, they are very charming, they can look like your average person, they have a big ego and like to boast about themselves.
Common myths about serial killers. Myth: all serial killers operate and travel through multiple states. Fact: most only work in a comfort zone and rarely ever go between states. Homeless transients and military would fall into this category. Myth: serial killers want to be stopped. Fact: with each kill, the serial killer gains more confidence and in turn eventually feels like they cannot be caught. This leads to sloppiness, which gets them caught.
Here are some more serial killer facts. First, most serial killers are young. 44% started when they were in their 20s, and then 26% started when they were in their teens, and then 24% started when they were in their 30s. Another thing, about more than 90% of serial killers are males. And lastly, many serial killers report having an abnormally strong sex drive, and many fantasize about dead women rather than living ones.
We have now reached the conclusion of our project. During this presentation, you have learned about some of the socio-psychological reasons a person may become a serial killer, as well as some information about serial killers from the past and facts about them. All in all, serial killers are extremely disturbed individuals who often suffer from some sort of trauma or mental illness and end up taking it out on multiple victims while having little to no remorse. There are many different types of serial killing, and the psychological aspects of a serial killer can vary person to person. Oftentimes, serial killers do not appear to be dangerous, but well-rounded and clean-cut.
It is important to be extremely aware of your surroundings and know that not everyone is who they seem to be. Our group hopes to have given you more knowledge on the socio-psychological reasons a person may become a serial killer. Thank you.